When someone with an avoidant attachment style starts pulling away, many people assume it's just another phase of emotional distancing, but sometimes the signs point to something deeper. Avoidants are often skilled at creating emotional space, keeping parts of their lives private, and avoiding uncomfortable conversations. While privacy alone doesn't mean anything suspicious is happening, certain patterns can reveal that attention, emotional energy, or romantic interest may be directed elsewhere. In today's video, we'll explore 5 things an avoidant may do when another romantic connection is being hidden from view. These behaviors aren't absolute proof, but when several appear together, they can reveal important clues about what's really happening beneath the surface. Stay until the end, because the final sign is often the one most people overlook. At first, the change may seem small and easy to dismiss. Messages that once arrived quickly begin taking hours to receive a response. Conversations that used to flow naturally become shorter and less engaging. There is less curiosity, fewer questions, and noticeably less effort to keep the interaction going. While everyone gets busy from time to time, the difference here is consistency. What was once a normal pattern of connection slowly transforms into a pattern of distance, leaving the other person wondering what has changed. One of the most confusing aspects of this shift is that it rarely happens all at once. Instead, communication gradually becomes more restricted over days or weeks. Long conversations are replaced with brief replies. Meaningful discussions are exchanged for surface-level interactions. Even when communication does happen, it often feels rushed, as though attention is focused somewhere else. The emotional warmth that once existed seems harder to find, creating a sense that something important is missing. Avoidant individuals naturally value personal space and independence, which can make it difficult to distinguish between normal distancing and something more significant. However, when another romantic interest is involved, communication often changes in ways that feel different from a typical need for space. There may be an increase in unexplained absences, frequent claims of being busy, or sudden periods of unavailability that don't seem to match previous behavior. The issue isn't simply having less time, it's the growing lack of consistency and transparency surrounding that time. Another common sign is a decrease in emotional engagement. Responses may become more mechanical, lacking the depth and connection that were once present. Personal stories, daily updates, and expressions of affection may become increasingly rare. Conversations that previously felt meaningful can start feeling like obligations. This often leaves the other person carrying the responsibility for keeping communication alive, initiating most conversations, and making the majority of the effort. As this pattern continues, uncertainty begins to grow. Questions naturally arise, yet attempts to gain clarity may not lead to satisfying answers. Explanations can feel vague, incomplete, or repetitive. There may always seem to be a reason for the distance, but those reasons fail to fully explain the dramatic change in behavior. Over time, the gap between words and actions becomes more noticeable. What makes this situation particularly challenging is that communication serves as the foundation of emotional connection. When that foundation begins to weaken, trust can also start to erode. The absence of regular communication creates room for doubt, confusion, and overthinking. Small concerns that could have been addressed through honest conversation remain unresolved, causing anxiety to build. It's important to remember that reduced communication alone does not automatically mean another person is involved. Stress, personal struggles, work pressures, and emotional overwhelm can all affect communication patterns. However, when restricted communication is paired with secrecy, emotional withdrawal, defensiveness, and other concerning behaviors, it becomes harder to ignore the possibility that attention and emotional energy are being invested elsewhere. In many cases, the most revealing sign isn't a single missed message or delayed response. It's the ongoing pattern of distance that steadily replaces the connection that once felt natural and secure. Privacy is a normal part of every healthy relationship. Everyone deserves personal space, independent interests, and moments that belong solely to them. However, there is a significant difference between privacy and secrecy. Privacy protects individuality, while secrecy often protects information that someone does not want discovered. When an avoidant begins hiding another romantic connection, one of the clearest changes can be an increase in secrecy surrounding everyday activities and routines. At first, the shift may seem subtle. Details that were once shared naturally start disappearing from conversations. Questions about how the day went, who was involved in certain activities, or what plans are coming up may receive vague or incomplete answers. Instead of offering specific details, responses become general and difficult to follow. The information isn't necessarily false, but it often feels carefully limited. The goal appears to be revealing as little as possible while still maintaining the appearance of openness. This can be especially confusing because avoidant individuals already tend to guard their independence. They may naturally prefer keeping parts of their lives separate from relationships. But when secrecy increases beyond their normal behavior, the difference often becomes noticeable. There is a new level of caution in conversations. Topics that were once discussed freely suddenly become uncomfortable. Questions that used to receive straightforward answers are now met with hesitation, distraction, or quick changes of subject. Another common sign is inconsistency in the information being shared. Small details may not seem to match previous explanations. Plans may frequently change without much clarification. Stories may feel incomplete, leaving gaps that create confusion rather than understanding. While occasional inconsistencies happen in everyone's life, repeated patterns can create a growing sense that something important is being left out. Technology often becomes another area where increased secrecy appears. Phones, social media accounts, and communication habits may suddenly become more guarded than before. Devices that were once left openly on a table are now kept out of sight. Notifications may be hidden. Online activity may seem different or more protected. None of these behaviors automatically indicate another romantic interest, but they can contribute to a larger pattern when combined with other signs of emotional distancing. One reason secrecy tends to increase is that maintaining separate realities requires careful management. The more information that is shared, the greater the chance that inconsistencies will emerge. As a result, conversations become more controlled, details are minimized, explanations remain brief. The avoidant may appear increasingly uncomfortable with questions that require specifics, because specifics create opportunities for contradiction. Over time, this lack of transparency can have a significant impact on trust. Relationships thrive when both people feel informed, included, and emotionally connected. When information becomes increasingly difficult to access, uncertainty naturally grows. The issue isn't the existence of personal boundaries. Healthy boundaries are important. The issue is the sudden shift from openness to concealment without a clear explanation. It's important to remember that increased secrecy alone is not proof that another woman is involved. Personal stress, fear of conflict, or a desire for independence can also lead to more guarded behavior. However, when secrecy appears alongside reduced communication, emotional withdrawal, defensiveness, and unexplained changes in priorities, it becomes part of a larger pattern that deserves attention. In many cases, people do not become concerned because of one secretive moment. They become concerned because openness slowly disappears, replaced by a constant feeling that something important is happening just out of sight. One of the most painful changes to experience in any relationship is the feeling that emotional connection is slowly fading away. Unlike obvious conflicts or dramatic arguments, emotional withdrawal often happens quietly. It develops gradually, making it difficult to identify at first. Conversations may still occur, daily routines may continue, and contact may remain consistent enough to appear normal on the surface. Yet underneath it all, something feels different. The emotional investment that once created closeness begins to disappear. At the beginning of a relationship, emotional energy is usually easy to recognize. There is curiosity, engagement, and a genuine desire to connect. Thoughts, feelings, experiences, and future plans are shared openly. Both people invest time and attention into understanding one another. However, when an avoidant starts directing emotional energy toward another romantic interest, that investment often begins to shift. Since emotional resources are limited, attention given elsewhere frequently results in less emotional availability within the existing relationship. One of the earliest signs is a decline in meaningful conversations. Discussions that once lasted for hours may become brief and surface level. Instead of showing interest in personal experiences, challenges, or achievements, responses may feel distracted or disconnected. There is less enthusiasm, fewer follow-up questions, and a noticeable reduction in emotional presence. It may seem as though the conversation is happening, but the connection behind it is missing. Another indication is a lack of engagement during important moments. Good news that would have once been celebrated receives a simple response. Difficult situations that would have inspired support are met with limited interest. Emotional highs and lows no longer seem to hold the same importance. This can create a feeling of loneliness even while the relationship technically continues. Physical presence may still exist, but emotional participation becomes increasingly rare. As emotional investment decreases, affection often changes as well. Warmth, reassurance, and expressions of appreciation may become less frequent. Small gestures that once communicated care and attention begin to disappear. The relationship may start feeling more transactional than emotional, as though interactions are taking place out of habit rather than genuine connection. This shift can leave the other person questioning whether the bond they once felt is still there. What makes emotional withdrawal particularly confusing is that it rarely comes with a clear explanation. There may be no major argument, no obvious conflict, and no direct acknowledgement that anything has changed. Instead, the distance grows silently. Attempts to reconnect may be met with indifference or minimal effort. Conversations about the relationship itself may feel uncomfortable or quickly avoided. This lack of clarity often creates frustration because the problem can be felt but not easily discussed. When another romantic connection is involved, emotional withdrawal may become even more noticeable because emotional attention is being redirected elsewhere. Excitement, curiosity, and emotional energy that once belonged within the relationship may now be invested in someone new. As a result, the existing connection receives less focus, less enthusiasm, and less emotional commitment. Of course, emotional withdrawal does not automatically mean another woman is involved. Stress, burnout, personal struggles, anxiety, and other life challenges can also cause someone to become emotionally distant. However, when emotional disengagement appears alongside increased secrecy, restricted communication, unexplained schedule changes, and defensive behavior, it becomes part of a larger pattern that is difficult to ignore. Often, the strongest warning sign is not what is being said. It is the gradual disappearance of the emotional connection that once made the relationship feel secure, valued, and alive. Defensiveness is often one of the most revealing behaviors when someone is trying to avoid uncomfortable truths. In healthy relationships, questions and concerns can usually be discussed openly, even when the conversation is difficult. While nobody enjoys being questioned or challenged all the time, a person who has nothing significant to hide will generally be willing to provide reassurance, clarification, or honest explanations. However, when another romantic connection is being concealed, simple discussions can suddenly become emotionally charged, leading to reactions that seem far stronger than the situation requires. At first, the change may appear subtle. A harmless question about plans, availability, or recent behavior receives an unusually sharp response. Instead of answering directly, the focus shifts toward criticizing the question itself. What could have been a straightforward conversation quickly turns into an argument about trust, privacy, or personal freedom. The original concern is never fully addressed because attention is redirected elsewhere. One reason this happens is that defensiveness serves as a protective barrier. When someone feels that certain information could expose an uncomfortable reality, emotional reactions become a way of discouraging further investigation. Rather than discussing the issue openly, irritation, frustration, or anger may be used to end the conversation before it reaches sensitive territory. Over time, this creates a pattern where important questions consistently lead to conflict instead of clarity. Another common sign is the tendency to label legitimate concerns as unreasonable. Questions that would normally be considered fair may suddenly be described as controlling, jealous, needy, or overly suspicious. This can leave the other person feeling guilty simply for seeking understanding. Instead of receiving answers, they begin questioning their own judgment. The discussion shifts away from the unexplained behavior and toward defending the right to ask questions in the first place. Defensiveness may also appear through avoidance rather than confrontation. Rather than becoming openly angry, the avoidant may dismiss concerns, change the subject, make jokes, or simply refuse to engage in the discussion. The result is the same. The issue remains unresolved. Important conversations are postponed repeatedly, leaving uncertainty to grow. The lack of resolution often becomes more frustrating than the original concern because there is no opportunity to reach mutual understanding. As this pattern continues, communication becomes increasingly difficult. The other person may begin walking on eggshells, carefully choosing words to avoid triggering another defensive reaction. Questions become less frequent, not because concerns have disappeared, but because every attempt at discussion feels exhausting. This creates a situation where important relationship issues remain buried beneath the surface, slowly damaging trust and emotional security. One particularly telling sign is when the intensity of the reaction seems completely out of proportion to the question being asked. A simple request for clarification generates a level of frustration that doesn't match the conversation. This often happens because the reaction is connected not only to the question itself, but also to the fear of what further discussion might uncover. The stronger the desire to keep certain information hidden, the stronger the emotional response may become. It's important to remember that defensiveness alone does not prove another woman is involved. People can become defensive for many reasons, including stress, insecurity, fear of conflict, or past relationship experiences. However, when defensiveness consistently appears alongside restricted communication, increased secrecy, emotional withdrawal, and unexplained changes in behavior, it becomes part of a larger pattern. In many cases, the greatest concern is not the defensive reaction itself, but the fact that honest conversations seem increasingly impossible. When openness is replaced by avoidance and clarification is replaced by conflict, trust begins to weaken, leaving questions that continue to grow without answers. One of the most noticeable changes that can occur when an avoidant is hiding another romantic connection is a sudden shift in priorities. Everyone's schedule changes from time to time. Work becomes demanding, family responsibilities arise, personal goals require attention, and unexpected events can create temporary disruptions. These situations are a normal part of life. However, when priorities begin changing consistently without clear explanations, and when the relationship repeatedly seems to fall lower on the list of importance, it can signal that emotional energy and attention are being directed elsewhere. At first, the changes may seem small. Plans that were once easy to make suddenly become difficult to schedule. Availability decreases. Time together becomes less frequent. Activities that were once considered important no longer receive the same level of commitment. There always appears to be something else demanding attention. While occasional busyness is understandable, the pattern becomes concerning when it continues for an extended period without a reasonable explanation. One common sign is the appearance of new commitments that seem to emerge out of nowhere. Suddenly, there are additional responsibilities, unexpected social activities, extra obligations, or unexplained schedule changes. Questions about these new priorities often result in vague answers that provide little clarity. Instead of understanding what has changed, the other person is left trying to fill in the blanks. Over time, these unanswered questions create uncertainty and frustration. Another indicator is the imbalance between words and actions. Reassurance may still be offered, Promises about spending time together may still be made, yet the actual behavior tells a different story. Plans are postponed, commitments are forgotten, opportunities to connect are repeatedly missed. What matters most is not what is being said, but what is consistently being prioritized. Actions often reveal shifts in attention long before words do. As emotional investment moves elsewhere, enthusiasm within the relationship may begin to decline. Activities that once generated excitement now feel like obligations. Time spent together may appear rushed or distracted. Even when interactions occur, there can be a sense that attention is divided. The relationship no longer seems to occupy the same position it once held. This change is often felt before it can be clearly explained. What makes this situation particularly difficult is that the avoidant may genuinely appear busy. The issue is not necessarily the existence of new responsibilities. The issue is the lack of transparency surrounding them. Healthy relationships typically involve enough communication to help both people understand major changes in priorities. When explanations remain vague and important details are consistently withheld, uncertainty naturally begins to grow. Another common pattern is that efforts to discuss these changes often lead nowhere. Questions about shifting priorities may be brushed aside or met with general statements that fail to provide real understanding. The focus remains on being busy rather than explaining why certain aspects of the relationship are receiving significantly less attention. As a result, concerns remain unresolved and trust gradually weakens. Of course, changing priorities alone do not prove that another woman is involved. Career goals, personal growth, family issues, health concerns, and many other life circumstances can influence how time and energy are allocated. However, when unexplained priority shifts occur alongside restricted communication, increased secrecy, emotional withdrawal, and defensiveness, they become part of a larger pattern that is difficult to ignore. In many cases, the strongest warning sign is not simply that priorities have changed. It is the feeling that the relationship is consistently being moved further down the list, while the reasons behind that change remain hidden. When attention, effort, and emotional energy continually flow elsewhere, the distance becomes impossible to overlook, and the questions surrounding that distance become increasingly difficult to answer. Perhaps the most overlooked sign of all is the growing presence of inconsistencies. Unlike obvious changes such as reduced communication or increased secrecy, inconsistencies often appear as small details that seem harmless on their own. A forgotten statement, a story that changes slightly, an explanation that doesn't fully add up, or a behavior that contradicts previous actions may not seem important at first. However, when these moments begin accumulating over time, they can create a pattern that becomes difficult to ignore. This is often when intuition starts sending signals that something isn't quite right. Many people dismiss their intuition because they fear being unfair, suspicious, or overly sensitive. They tell themselves they are overthinking, imagining problems, or reading too much into ordinary situations. While it is important not to jump to conclusions, intuition is often the mind's way of recognizing patterns before those patterns become obvious. It notices subtle changes in behavior, tone, consistency, and emotional presence. Even when the evidence seems unclear, there can be a persistent feeling that things no longer align the way they once did. One common inconsistency involves explanations that frequently change. A reason given today may not match a reason given later. Details surrounding certain events may shift depending on when they are discussed. Individually, these differences can appear insignificant. People forget things, make mistakes, and occasionally misremember events. The concern arises when inconsistencies become repetitive rather than occasional. The more often stories require adjustments, the harder it becomes to maintain trust in the information being shared. Another sign is when actions and words stop matching each other. Reassurance may be offered regularly, yet behavior creates uncertainty. Commitments may be expressed verbally but rarely followed through in practice. Promises may sound convincing, but daily actions tell a different story. Relationships are built not only on what people say, but also on what they consistently do. When those two things stop aligning, confusion naturally follows. Behavioral inconsistencies can also appear in emotional responses. Certain topics may trigger reactions that seem unusual or unexpected. Questions that once received calm answers now create tension. Ordinary discussions suddenly become uncomfortable. There may be moments when openness seems present, followed by periods of extreme distance without explanation. These emotional fluctuations can leave the other person feeling uncertain about where they truly stand. Over time, small inconsistencies begin connecting to one another. What once appeared to be isolated incidents starts forming a larger picture. The issue is rarely one specific event. Instead, it is the accumulation of many small moments that create a lingering sense that important pieces of information are missing. This is why intuition often becomes stronger as time passes. The mind starts recognizing recurring patterns that are difficult to explain away individually. It is important to remember that intuition should never replace facts. Assumptions can damage relationships when conclusions are reached without evidence. Healthy communication and honest conversations should always come before accusations. However, ignoring persistent inconsistencies can be equally problematic. Trust is strongest when words, actions, emotions, and explanations align consistently over time. When intuition repeatedly detects contradictions, unexplained changes, and patterns that do not make sense, it deserves attention rather than dismissal. Combined with restricted communication, secrecy, emotional withdrawal, defensiveness, and shifting priorities, these inconsistencies become part of a much larger pattern. Often, the biggest warning sign is not a single lie or a single suspicious moment. It is the growing realization that too many pieces no longer fit together the way they once did, creating a feeling that something important remains hidden beneath the surface.